Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So I'd quickly like to go over the damage formula. What stats do you need to obtain maximum amount of damage? When do you decide that you want to take a buff to your overall damage instead of these offensive statistics? When is it better to, let's say, have a ring that would give you 3% more damage than a ring that might just give you only 5% more power? Which is better? Is power better than damage? Is damage better than combat advantage? How do these things compare with one another? Well, I've made a quick Excel sheet for you guys, and I'll have a link in the description where you can download this for yourself. Now you can see up the very top here, this is the exact damage formula. Now this is for PvE content when you don't have enemies with critical avoidance, and thus you will always have that full benefit from your critical severity. Now you can see with this very example, we have 85% power. And if we look at our damage buffs, we have 90 and 85%. So on this column, that's one damage calculation. And on this column, that's the other damage calculation. And you can see 5% power is equal to 5% damage buffs. Now you can see the plus here, and these are going to be damage buffs that will add with one another. Let's say we were to add 5% extra damage here, okay? Let's say these were back to 90%. You can see that 5% extra damage will indeed give you 5% extra damage. However, if you were to add that 5% damage to this damage buffs here that we already have, you can see we only obtain just over 2.5% overall damage. This is your overall damage gain. You can see stacking more and more buffs does not necessarily mean that they're actually going to give you that exact amount. The more you have, the less you gain of it. And that's with these additive damage buffs. If you have a debuff on the target, that might add another 5% damage. And you can see adding 5% here versus adding a multiplicative buff or a debuff can end up being much greater benefit. It's a 2.44% to gain 5% times buff than a 5% additive buff. And overall, again, you can see that there with how power, when you have it on only like 85%, is equal to your damage buffs when you have them there set. So when you have 90% in damage buffs, you will make power and combat advantage equal your damage buffs. You can see, for example, let's say where I was choosing between the rusted iron leggings and the Wasteland Wanderer boots. The Wasteland Wanderer boots give me 5% combat advantage. You can see this would be where I would gain the buff there. I got up to 90% with my combat advantage. And over here, I would gain up to 90% in damage buffs, going from 85% to 90%. And you can see they're exactly the same. 5% combat advantage, same as 5% damage buff. That is not true when you have much lower values. Let's say I have 0% in damage buffs, and I would gain 5%. You can see getting this 5% extra damage is 2.24% higher than gaining just 5% combat advantage. And that is exactly true the other way around. If we go from 0% power to 5% power, and we look at that at 0% damage buff to 5% damage buff, they are exactly equal. And that's the same with combat advantage as well. You can see that there, 5% combat advantage, same as 5% damage. Just keep in mind that accuracy is calculated a little different. Going from 0% accuracy to 5% compared to 5% extra damage is a terrible increase. You can see gaining the 5% damage is more than the 3% increase in your overall damage than stacking the accuracy. And it's the same with your crit and critical severity. Let's say we were to go from 0% crit chance to 5% crit chance. You can see gaining the extra damage boost is a little bit higher. And that will also depend on your critical severity. If you have no critical severity, you will gain 0 benefit from even 90% crit chance. However, if you have 90% crit chance and then you are to go from 0% crit severity to 5% crit severity and compare that to your 5% damage, it's still a little bit better always to get the 5% damage buff until you, let's say, have about 5.5% crit severity versus 5% damage. Then they're nearly equal. You can push this to 5.6 and then you can see the crit severity is better. So hopefully this tool can be somewhat useful to you guys, and essentially what you want to find is a balance. A very simple explanation of this is, for example, let's say we have our 3 slots, right? And we can put our stats into each of those slots. Let's say we have 30 points to put in those slots, 30 points on our stats. If we put all the points in one slot, you can see when we multiply everything on those slots, we only would gain 30 damage. However, if we split them out to 5 and 25, we'd gain 125 damage. That's a massive increase from there. And you can go all the way to balancing it out to put 10 in each slot, so they all have the equal amount, and you gain the highest amount of damage. And this is exactly the same with this damage formula. Balance is best. You can see it right there. A very good question is, let's say we have these stats here, and is it better for me to switch out to the Dragon Hunter or the Neverwinter Knight? Well, we're gaining 7.5% combat advantage there and another 7.5% combat advantage there. So that totals up to 15%. And so let's say we were to lose 15% combat advantage, so that we're only down there on 75% combat advantage. And then our damage buffs, let's say we're at only 80, and we go all the way up to add your Neverwinter Knight 7.5%, add your Dragon Hunter with 11%, and you're nearly at 100% damage buffs. And you can see, indeed, stacking those damage buffs can be a teeny bit better than that combat advantage, and that's just because of the stat gain. But in my opinion, it's not worth it, because you're attacking the Linde, and she's not a dragon. You're attacking the ads, they're not dragons, so you will lose damage throughout that, but it's still a very viable build to go full damage buffs like Minsk, Bitiri, Dragon Hunter, and your Neverwinter Knight in all 4 slots. It can be viable, and you can see you will gain that damage boost slightly better than just, let's say, reducing your combat advantage by 15%. And you can make that even better by trying to rebalance your stats and end up losing, let's say, 15% accuracy instead, and you can see the damage gap gets different because of the math behind how accuracy works. And you will also see that with critical strike and critical severity, that it will be a little bit less effective than your power or your combat advantage. Now, another example would be, let's say we were to use Wolfgar and Drizzt in our companion equip bonuses, then we would gain roughly 5% combat advantage, 5% crit strike, crit severity, and also accuracy. And let's say we were to move those, we would go down from like 90%. Our damage buffs would go up to like 98%, from let's say 80% for using the Dragon Hunter, and we'd have the same here of our damage buffs going up about 18% from 80% to 98%. And you can see that using Wolfgar and Drizzt to cap your stats can overall be more effective to gain a 0.56% damage increase than gaining those extra damage buffs. Keep in mind though, if you were to rebalance your stats, make these all capped, let's say here, and then go and reduce your accuracy by like 20%, you can see that doesn't really hurt your build too much. You can see it's pretty much equal there. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to balance your stats and find out what is best. Do I use the Wasteland Wanderers? Do I use the Rusted Iron leggings? And so on. And usually the best thing is whatever gives you the most stats, like in 11% damage versus 7.5% power, you take the 11% damage nearly any day, just because 11% is higher than 7.5%. So again, yes, math can be a little bit complicated. And again, hopefully this Excel document can help you. You can just input whatever stats you have, and you can see then which would be better in what choice. Do I gain 5% damage here or 5% of this stat there? Which can be better on your overall build. Can be a little bit complicated to try and figure out exactly what damage bonuses you have, as they don't show it. And when you have like a damage bonus only 3% to, let's say, at wills, then you can't really consider that as an overall 3% buff, since that's only going to be on your at wills. And if your at wills are only like 50% of your damage, then that ends up being only half of 3% to your overall damage, and so on. The math can be a bit complicated, but this is what I like about these character progression games, and where you build up your character to gain certain stats and try and optimize. And this is what you do in endgame to figure out what's a good build with what stats, and all that optimization is great fun, at least for me. If this isn't up your alley, then you can definitely just copy people's builds, and if you trust them that they've gone ahead and went through the math and looked at what's good, then you could copy their build and do pretty well. So again, if I present this well, consider leaving the video a like. If you're new around here, consider subscribing. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.